I'm joined today by Benjamin Wallace, or Ben, as he prefers to be called, I think. But Benjamin is the best-selling author of Post-Apocalyptic Nomadic Warriors, which has taken me pretty much all day of rehearsing to say without spitting out or losing my false teeth. But Ben, you published post. I told you, post.
We just refer to it as post around here.
Yeah.
So,
Okay, Post. You published Post in 2012, and you've subsequently published two more in the series. Post for me was one of those rare books where I reread the review that I posted. I think it was about a year ago. I reread that today, and I genuinely laughed out loud at that. That's not often you can actually say of a book that you laughed out loud, and it's I think a tremendous thing to do to another human being is to spread that laughter. And I actually wrote, it sounds rather fawning now that I'm interviewing you, but I said I think the title of my review was Best in Genre, Read It. So that, yeah, well, I mean, it absolutely deserves the praise. What was your starting, first of all, what's your interest in post-apocalyptic humor? How did that get started? I mean, that's a strange one.
that goes back years. It was probably, I've always wanted to write ever since I was a kid, and that was one of the first books I wanted to try and write was apologize for the doorbell there.
Well, it wouldn't be a humor interview if there wasn't some kind of distraction like that.
I got the kids are away, the dog's up, but here comes the package. One more second here. But it was the post-apocalyptic genre is something I always loved. Of course, Mad Max, even the worst ones. Warriors of the Wasteland, Warlords of the 21st Century. Like, there were so many just horrible late 70s, early 80s post-apocalyptic movies that it was, I guess, like watching a train wreck or a monkey with a gun, right? Like, you just always watched them. They were never, I mean, the Mad Max movies were really good films, but, like, they're funny. And I don't think anyone, like, how could you make these movies and not realize you were making a comedy, you know? But, like, there's still something about watching them, like, they're not good. Most of them are just horrible B movies, but they were just fun to watch. And it just, over the years, I'm also, grew up on Airplane and the Zucker comedies and stuff like that. And I always wondered if it was possible to write a book like that. And it was kind of that's the genre it went with least. And as I got older, it was more like looking around at people saying, this is probably the worst time in history for something catastrophic to happen. Like, we wouldn't stand a chance. Not even forget all the bombs and the chemicals, whatever about the war, just trying to get by on our own without all the modern conveniences is going to be funnier than anything else. So that's where across the series of books, I think that's how they kind of are distinct, is each one kind of focuses on a town or a bunch of people trying to get along, and they're a little different every time. The first one's people trying to start, run a little democracy or whatever. There's a tyrannical government somewhere out there, a town out there that's kind of preying on the weak. The second book is a bunch of Renaissance fair workers and staff survive the apocalypse, so they form their own little kingdom in the mountains, and they're more of a monarchy. The third one's more of a politically correct establishment, that kind of thing. So I was just the humor to me really comes from how would people try and get along after everything we know went away, all the comforts went away, and I don't know. It just it was just something I always found really funny that no one had really tried to tackle the humor in that I knew of. So it seemed like a good. It was actually the second book I wrote, but the first book I published. It just seemed like something unique, and it, I guess, resonated with some people kind of right off the bat. So like I say, there's 3 books in the series now. I'm working on the 4th, and there's even a collection of short stories.
That's interesting. You say it was the first book you wrote, but the second that you published. What was the first one that you published then?
I have a book called Tortugas Rising.
Oh, yeah.
Which is, it's kind of, I wrote it about 3 years before I wrote Post, and I wrote it before Kindle and self-publishing was really anything. And at the time, just about the time I finished writing it, I'd been following all the agents and stuff on their blogs, and they were all saying, I'm quitting to go do crochet. Like, right now, the book market's so bad. Their advice was, don't submit anything now because they're not looking for new authors, and if you resubmit it when things are better, they'll know they rejected you once. So just hold on to it. Hold on to anything you've got right now. So I did that and kind of stepped away from the dream for a little bit. And then a couple years later, when Kindle came around and stuff like that, I started with a fresh book that was a little more, I thought, my own voice. The Tortugas Rising was kind of, I've always loved Ludlum and Cussler and Jack DeBrule books. Just the action thriller, but to me they were always so, it was a little too convenient for me. They were always a former ninja or a spy, or they always had these, they always had the background to pull off whatever ridiculous, stop whatever ridiculous plot was threatening the world at the time. So I wanted to, in that one, I was playing with the humor of like, what if these guys had no skills at all? Like, they're trapped on this chain of man-made islands, and there's one part where they're just trying to they're not trying to stop anyone, they're just trying to survive. They come across a helicopter, and in any other book, they'll fly off the helicopter, but they're normal people. They don't know how to fly a helicopter, so they're just, they're looking at salvation. They can't do a thing about it. So that's where I tried to play with the humor in that one, and it was a little more, I think it was funny because somebody the other day, I wrote that probably 8 or 9 years ago now, and someone the other day just came across it like, oh, he's really hit his stride now. I'm like, oh, that was the first thing I ever wrote. It's a little more mainstream, and I think people say that it feels more like a traditional thriller or action adventure versus the other ones where I came back a little later and was just having a little more fun with whatever genre I happened to be playing in. So,
I mean, that's really, really interesting. I mean, had you planned that novel as much as you'd planned Post?
I hadn't thought about it for years. It was just kind of, that's what I was reading at the time, and I thought it might be. It was also, in putting off writing a book, I read 1,000 books on how to write a book, and they were like, here are the genres. Here's how to write the blockbuster novel, how to write the breakout novel, how to write the best-selling. They were all very similarly titled, and that one was written a little bit more to, I guess we'd call it more to market now, but it was really on trend back then, and I really enjoyed it. But it was, at the end of it, I'd really like to do more books in that series with those characters because they were really, really fun to write. But I don't know how to make it unique again. It's like that's the one thing that was like, the reason they're always a SEAL, ex-SEAL or Special Forces or former assassin is because how else do you get into that kind of trouble on a consistent basis, right? So,
and again, get out.
Yeah, and get out and get in. And eventually you learn and just stay home,
Yeah.
So
it's not just get out, but it's survive to actually have the sequel written about you, to make another movie or another $1 million on the book.
Exactly. It was in the end, I think I really do like the book, but my style kind of evolved to be something a little different. If I think I tried to write a sequel to it today, I don't know that it would fit with the first one.
Yeah.
I'm a little jokier, a little more, always played on the tropes, but I think a little more blatantly after that, and it just kind of developed a different style. I think in any of those, going back to write a sequel to any series, all mine are very different. The post-apocalyptic ones are kind of a little, I wouldn't say zany or wacky, but they're a little looser with the comedy. I have another series that's very inspired by the pulps, and it's a little more hard-boiled written, and you got to stick with that tone, since the other 3 books are already like that. And then, so going back to any series, there's a little bit different style. And I think that first book I wrote, I don't know that I could really get back into that style of writing again, or that I'd enjoy it as much as I enjoy the others at this point. So,
yeah.
But that was, that was the first book I wrote, and it was 3 years before the first one I published. So it's a little silly.
Yeah, with Post, what really, really struck me was that you knew that genre inside out. And what you did that I thought was clever was that you subverted it, and then what you did was you added some twists that weren't they definitely weren't obvious, and they definitely weren't slapstick. They were actually very, very clever sleights of hand, because I found at the beginning that I kind of wasn't sure who the hero was. I wasn't sure who the protagonist was. I wasn't sure who I was rooting for. And that was a nice place to start. And I found, oh, okay, so I'm a little bit confused in this world. And then I thought, oh yeah, okay, I'm rooting for this guy. And then you suddenly realize that in actual fact, it's not that guy you're rooting for at all in the end. You know, it's someone completely different, and you go, wow, you know, he actually pulled a pretty good, you know, without doing any spoilers, you pulled a pretty good stunt there, I think, and
Oh,
you
thank you.
and you. What I really enjoyed as well was that I think with a lot of people in that genre, it's very easy to, as I think you sort of alluded to, it's very easy to just push things up the absurdity curve without and not take any responsibility for that. But you did it ever so gently. You know, there was rational explanations for things, and when it got silly, it was silly, believable, which which really added to it because of course the characters are caught in the awkwardness of the silliness of it. You know, go, why, you know, this is absurd. It's self-knowing. And I think there's a great comedy in that. Whereas
Oh,
whereas
thank
with
you.
something like whereas with something like Python, it's absurd for the sake of absurdity. You were doing absurdity because you could, and because you were doing it in a way that was kind of subversive. How did you deliberately set out to go? Okay, I'm going to do some rug pulls here. That comedy rug pull where you go, oh, you know, character one, boom.
I think to a certain extent, it's I hate a book if I'm reading a book where I've been misled intentionally,
Sure.
and so you can't lie to the reader. And what I think what's great about a lot of the stuff I'd write, I don't know if you'd call it parody, more satire, but they're definitely. I get so many comments like, "Oh, you just ripped off Fallout." I'm like, no, I ripped off Mad Max. Like, let's be clear here. Like, everything I've done has been a parody to a certain extent of a genre, and with every genre comes the tropes, and we've been taught over and over through every movie and book we've read to expect these things. So I think in the first one, you talk about the characters, and you're not really sure who the real protagonist is. Maybe they're both good guys, whatever. I think we've just been trained to expect a certain story to come out, and I'm not lying to anyone. I'm not even actually misleading anyone. I'm just working on those assumptions, and at the end, if you switch it up a little bit, it's like, oh well, and I kind of think people go back and like try to find out where I misled them, and it's just not there. It's just we're working on,
Yeah.
Hollywood's done a great job of training us all to think a certain way, and to get that twist. And I'm not a big like twist author. Like I'm not, a lot of people are like, oh, I saw that ending coming. I'm like, I wasn't trying to fool you. Like we're not playing Clue here. It's just I'm trying to play with the stereotypes and stuff like that. But I think they do a great job of making for a little surprise twist here and there, just because we're taught so much to expect a certain thing, and if you go away from that, it's a big shock. I did that in the third book in a different way, and it really, really upset some people. So I've gotten some pretty harshly worded emails and reviews on the third book because it didn't play out how people expected it to at the end. So
Is that because everybody wants a happy ending and a nice resolution for the characters?
I think so, and I think in a post-apocalyptic world, that's a little hard to deliver every time.
Yes. Yeah. What are you expecting?
It's a horrible place. I have some horrible things happen in those books, and there's some really and like you were saying too, like I try really hard. I joke around that I don't write a lot of fart jokes. I really don't, but it just seems like people boil. For so long, there hasn't been that much humorous writing out there, at least on the shelves. It's always been found elsewhere. It was hard to get published anything funny, so there's very few authors to kind of say, oh, they're like this or it like this, and you get lumped in with. It's humbling. You even say, people say, oh, it's like Pratchett or like Monty Python or whatever.
Yeah.
And I think it is. So there's a certain amount of silliness that they did so well, and Douglas Adams and stuff like that. Like the absurdity and silliness is done so well. But I've always tried to play the action and the plot lines of all my books very, very straight, and the humor comes from the characters' reactions to those.
Yeah.
Instead of like I think with the post-apocalyptic universe, I did have some. There's one with all the different civilizations. There's one group of people worshiping a cat that lives in a Volkswagen or something like that. But I think you're so far removed from reality after the end of the world that you can have a little bit of fun. But everything else is like, and that's like a throwaway line. It's not even a big plot point or anything. But I try to be real about, like, it's kind of remember the Simpsons, the first episode of The Simpsons, when they had it drawn, they had they hadn't really worked out talking to the animators yet, and the animation was very cartoony. Like when they slammed the door would bend and bounce and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And they went back after the first couple episodes. They're like, "Oh, no more of that. We wanted the door to close like a door would close." And that's kind of how I try to approach things. Like the action's straight, the plot straight. There's not a lot of silliness in that. It's the character's reaction to the world around them that I try to find the humor in.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, really good readable fiction is strong characters put into situations which they find really, really difficult, and then you watch how they cope or don't cope, and
Sure.
yeah,
Now the difficulty may be super intelligent bears, and that's a little. But I think after the bomb, that's fine. But there's still a threat. They're still real, and how are people going to react to that? And a lot of the post-apocalyptic one too is kind of the mythology that people are creating about the world around them that's so new. I've had a lot of fun with that as well. Just people trying to make up a reason for what happened or for what's going on. So, but most of it's just playing with the tropes, playing with the expectations, and because we've been so trained to see all those coming, it's a little easier to kind of make that shift. And I mean, surprise and delight is what comedy is, and thankfully we've had ingrained in us what to expect, that it's a little easier to pull that surprise
yeah.
without having to lie or manipulate or really go too absurd. So.
Yeah. So are you now done with that series?
No, Revenge of the Apocalypse is going to be book 4.
Okay.
I'm working on that one now. I have a lot of thoughts on that one, and in the last one I wrote for it was a collection of short stories called Tales of the Apocalypse.
Yeah.
And it's about, I did a bunch of different short stories. I just wanted to do some funny little bits about the apocalypse. I have a raider getting his 6-month review and his performance review. They've welcomed him in. It's like, I don't think this is working. We don't know why you wear the nipple chains, that kind of thing. They're a health hazard. Why are you doing this? Like, just I never understood why so many people in post-apocalyptic films wore tires. They've got chains and tires. Like, I'm pretty sure there's a J.C. Penney warehouse that didn't get hit with all sorts of nice clothes in it. It just, so playing with that. But a lot of the stories are about the minor characters in the books, and it does kind of give a hint to what's coming in the novels down the road. I'm going to finish up Revenge of the Apocalypse and then maybe take a little break from it, but I think I'll always be coming back to that universe. I just it's like you say, it was the first one I put out there, so it's been the biggest series I've had. Just need to kind of step away from it for a little while, but I definitely want to get to that 4th book and kind of close the chapter on this one story cycle that's going on.
So when do you think we can look forward to seeing that being published?
Last spring.
Okay.
I think that was the last time.
Great, you give yourself time traveling deadlines.
I have to at this point. I've been promising that one for a while. Like I say, I do a little bit of work on the side too. So it's the next one I'm trying to get to, but I've got a few other things that have kind of caught my eye that I think I can get to a little quicker. So I may have I've got like an urban fantasy thing I want to try, some space stuff, but I definitely I feel I really owe it to the people that read the first 3 to get that 4th one out there, and I said kind of put an end to that part of the cycle.
Yeah. So. And I guess audiobooks coming in the next year or so, maybe.
I'm hoping to get those out real soon. I say I've got I'm going to start recording a couple myself. I've got a wonderful voice talent actor that's a really good friend of mine that's doing the post-apocalyptic series, and he's actually finished recording the first one. I need to get in and edit it and get it out there, but those are going to be coming. That's going to be a priority here in the next couple months.
Yeah.
To get those out there. So I need to it's going to be good to dive back into the books and kind of reground myself in the worlds I've created going forward, because there are more books in every series coming. So I just need to kind of remember a few things. Going back 6 years after writing, I think about 13 books now, it's like I should probably, how hard it is to reread what you've written, especially
absolutely.
The first book I put out there. I'm dreading going back through it and reading again. So. The nice thing is people are still enjoying it, so it can't be that horrible at this point.
Exactly.
But reading your own work is just a bear. So
yeah. Okay, so if people want to read more about you, then I guess it's benjaminwallacebooks.com, and I'll put up a bit of text with that printed on it. But Ben, thank you so much for talking with me today. It's a really funny, really fun interview, and it's great to know that there's going to be a fourth book out. Thank you very much for your time.
Oh, thank you, Mark. I appreciate it. Hey, actually, if you want to let you know, I'll send you the link. But if they go to my webpage too, they can download Post-Apocalyptic Nomadic Warriors for free.
There you go.
So they can get a free copy on your Kindle or any digital format they want.
And they'll get a newsletter from you with updates telling them, how things are progressing with the other books as well.
Yeah, and I try to include a lot of value in those newsletters, including free short stories every once in a while. I just put one out there called "Making Babies."
Yeah,
that was a fun story, and I'll throw those in every now and then in the newsletter too. So there's a lot of reason to listen, but they can sign up.
And videos of your oldest son being interviewed about.
I'm making my my 13-year-old watch movies that were made before he was born and getting his take on them, and we're going to do some more of those as well. He had a lot of fun doing those, and I think people really enjoyed those.
Yeah,
okay. I've got a whole bunch of stuff to subject him to. They're not all going to be good.
Yeah, I mean, yes, social services had hopefully not aware of those child torture, but
I forgot about some of the scenes in some of the movies he's watched, but I'm pretty quick with the pillow over his eyes or whatever, so it's harmless, I hope.
Yeah. Okay, Ben, thank you again so much for your time.
I really do appreciate it, Mark.
Cheers. Bye. That was the very wonderful Benjamin Wallace. We spent a very enjoyable hour talking shop and some complete nonsense after the interview. You can get a free book by signing up for his newsletter at benjaminwallacebooks.com. He does these hilarious videos with his teenage son. Sign up to make sure you don't miss them.